All right, welcome everybody. This is James Orr. Got a relatively small group here for sellers' property disclosure case studies. Not the sexiest topic we've ever seen, but is a important topic nonetheless. So I'm James Orr. The sellers' property disclosure case study video will be posted online at learntoberich.com/SBD-case-studies. After I'm done recording it, and we are recording it, so it should, technology willing, it will record. So since we have such a small group, I will ask if there's anybody on who would like to say who they are and where you are from, but don't expect much response tonight because I forgot to send out the email, and Jason is unable to make it tonight. He emailed me earlier this afternoon and said he was not going to be able to make it tonight. So it's just me and you, and probably most of the people listening to this recording afterward. The question is, Elijah says, still me from Fort Collins. So what's the craziest thing you've seen in the seller's property disclosure? If you want to share that with us, you're welcome to do that. Usually when I teach this class live to an audience, a group of 30 people or so, I tend to give out sample seller property disclosures. Each person gets a different one, and then they share what is on theirs. And so people can see the difference and see what the range of things are on the seller's property disclosure. Maybe what I'll do, I don't know if I want to commit to this, but maybe at some point in the future, I'll put up some example ones from houses that were in the MLS, and people can kind of see the difference between them all. So upcoming classes for next Tuesday, we're going to be doing negotiating win-win inspections for maximum benefit. That's actually a very interesting class because we talk about negotiating inspection issues and what the process is, first of all, especially here in Colorado, and definitely meet up on the Thursday night or the other nights to be able to see what those are. Welcome, Teddy. And basically see what the process is in here in Colorado for inspections, and then how to negotiate them. We're going to talk a lot about some strategy, what's normal, what is expected here, and how kind of all that works. And that's going to be next Tuesday, April 11th. After that, we're going to be closing real estate deals. That's going to be on April 18th. And that's going to deal with primarily the closing. What happens like the day before closing, at the closing itself. We're going to go over all the paperwork and what you expect to see and how the whole process works. And then usually what happens immediately after closing and what we hope you'll do there. So welcome, Teddy. Thanks for coming. Oh, wait, someone said something. I could imagine my neighbors was interesting when they blew up the kitchen cooking mat. Yeah, that sounds really crazy, actually. That's an example of what was on the seller's property disclosure. So closing real estate deals, that's going to be Tuesday the 18th. After that, it gets a little bit more sexy when we talk about Catch-Up Nomad overview. Catch-Up Nomad, for those that don't know, is you wake up and you realize, hey, I'm 35 years old, 40 years old, 45 years old, 50 years old, and I don't quite have savings in my retirement account that I need. And you realize you need to get on the ball and get moving right away in order to get caught up. By the way, over the weekend, I guess it was Sunday, over the weekend on Sunday, I was listening to an audio program, and I was reminded of the biblical story of the talents. And so I'm probably going to talk about that a little bit, but the idea is that, somebody gave, 3 people some money to kind of invest while they're away, and one person went and buried it in the ground, and one person took the money and did something really minor and didn't really do much with it, and the other person went out with industry and invested it and actually worked really hard in order to do it. And when the person came back who was away and kind of checked in with the servants who kind of had all these talents, what talents are a type of money, they kind of had the money there, that the person who buried it in the ground, they scolded him and told him that he was an evil servant and that really went to town on this guy, and really is the only one that went out there and actually was industrious and invested stuff was the one that they rewarded. It's a kind of a biblical story, a parable about the importance of taking responsibility and investing and doing stuff. And so I was it really hit home for me when people were when they were kind of talking about this story and how it kind of relates to Nomad and people not taking action. You have the knowledge. We're here to support you with this. It's completely free to get support from us. If you come every week and do it, if you want to upgrade to premium, which you should, you can get access to all the back videos and all the future videos and access them anytime, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff in there, and it's really cheap. It's like $100 for the year. But you can go ahead and do that, and then you need to take action. You need to actually invest take the small amount of money that is required to do Nomad. I mean, I showed you how to do it with nothing down. You can do it with 1% down, but you need to step up and do it. And you know, the parable of the talents in the Bible, I don't know exactly what section. I'll have to do some research. I just kind of heard about it. I was reminded of it from a kid. Good story, and definitely applicable to what we're doing. So that's sort of like the catch-up Nomad. You know, you really do need to step up and need to take that money and invest it. And now I'm talking to myself as much as I'm talking to you, because I definitely am cash heavy and you know, looking for opportunities to invest, and I probably should do a better job with that as well. So anyway, catch-up Nomad overview, that's April 25th. Definitely don't want to miss that. It's a pretty amazing class. Analyzing a deal with Brian's spreadsheet, also super amazing class. I mean, if we're ever talking about doing deal analysis, I actually put up the spreadsheet on the screen and we walk through how to analyze numbers together for doing Nomad deal analysis. And so that's an amazing class, and that's going to be on May 2nd. For a list of the upcoming class, you can go to learntobierich.com/schedule. You can also go to learntoberich.com/meetup. So those are the upcoming class schedule. So what is Nomad? Normally here, I'd ask Jason kind of what is Nomad. So I'm going to tell you what Nomad is tonight. Nomad is you buy a home as an owner-occupant. You live there for a year, and the reason we live there for a year is we were getting special owner-occupant financing. We're putting very little down in most cases, getting a little bit of a benefit to interest rate, but the trade-off is you have to actually live in the property. You cannot tell the lender, I'll sort of live in the property, and then you kind of move in for a week or don't quite move in or do whatever you want. That's loan fraud. Don't do that. We encourage people to actually treat our investor financial partners right, which is your lender. They're willing to loan you all or the overwhelming majority of the money in order to buy property. Just play by the rules, play fair. And so they require you live there for a year. And so you live there. It's part of what you sign at closing. Live there for a year, and then after the year's up, you convert that previous house to a rental, and you go and buy another house, you know, presumably with little down, and you basically move into that one. And you kind of repeat this process until you acquire the number of rental properties that you want. Usually we talk about 10, although it can be 1, it could be 2, it could be 20 for all I know. I mean, it's really up to you. It's what you decide is right for you and your family. So that is what the Nomad model is about. That's what these classes are about. The Tuesday night classes are very specific, focused on Nomad, and the Thursday night meetups that we have people coming to in different markets, those are for taking the class lessons that we have on Tuesday, sort of like a book club. You kind of get together on Tuesday night or, you know, shortly thereafter, watch the video, watch the recording. Then on Thursday, you get together with a local real estate agent, local lender, some other people from your group that are kind of doing Nomad, and you network and you grow together, and you learn about, you know, James says this, but we're in a different market, and so here, kind of the adaptation for Nomad is going to be whatever it is. And it seems like what's going to end up happening with Nomad, just to kind of give you a hint of what's coming forward, what to look forward to next year or so. You know, we're going to go through a whole class cycle for the first year. And then once we get all of the classes recorded, what I probably will do is I probably will have special guests on that are doing Nomad, or a lender or insurance guy or title guy or whatever it is. And we will go through and further expand the classes for Nomad in year 2. And then if I have to record a new class because we've got updated information or something's improved, I'll go ahead and record, you know, kind of as needed, but I won't reteach the entire series again next year. It's kind of my latest thought. So we'll see. I'm really flexible on how we're going to do this. It's really what's going to best serve the nomads and real estate agents and lenders, and so in those different markets that are doing that, and our local market. It's really, you know, because I have clients here that are nomads that are buying and selling stuff. So, all right, so that's what Nomad is. Now we're going to get into seller's property disclosure case studies. So the seller's property disclosure is a special form that the seller of a property fills out in order to disclose everything that they know about the property. It's their opportunity to come clean. You know, tomorrow night locally, we're teaching asset protection part 1, and next week we're teaching asset protection part 2. But one of the ways to kind of cover yourself is to disclose. So if you're a seller and you know something about the property, you should disclose that to the buyer. Any material fact about the property, you are required to disclose it. And so the seller's property disclosure is the official form put out by the Colorado Real Estate Commission in order to have a seller disclose the information that they know about the property. And they sign it, and then the buyer acknowledges that they've received it, and we kind of move forward. So I'm going to show you some information about it, tell you kind of how it works, where we use it, what's normal to see on it, and then I'll definitely take questions as we go. Definitely have a couple people on, but you know, you're welcome to ask questions as we go. Feel free to interrupt, and I will be happy to answer those questions. So let's jump right in. So what is the seller's property disclosure? Well, it is the document prepared by the seller to disclose to you what they know about the property. We're going to go over them in detail next. Now that I told you it's the opportunity for the seller to cover their butt and disclose to you all the information they know about it, I will tell you up front that some sellers will not provide one. And it drives me crazy because, if I was advising, if I had a client that was a seller, I would totally advise them, hey, it's in your best interest to fill this thing out and disclose to the buyer. But yet I still see sellers lining through a seller's property disclosure saying, I've never lived in the property. Is that a valid way to disclose information that you know about the property? Does the fact that you never lived in the property mean that you don't have knowledge about the property? I would argue no. I would argue that you do have knowledge about the property. When you bought it, did you receive a seller's property disclosure? Any knowledge that was told to you when you bought it is knowledge you should have about the property because it was disclosed to you. You were given that information. You know about it. So you should know everything that the previous seller disclosed to you about the property. You should know that. What about, did you have to ever do any repairs on the property? Did a property management company, even if you didn't live there, even if it was a rental property, and even if there was a property manager in the way, did you ever pay a property manager an invoice for replacing the roof, replacing a furnace, replacing carpet? If so, guess what? You have knowledge about the property. I don't care if you didn't live there. You know stuff about that property. You know that the roof was 14 years old because when you bought it, they told you it was 5 years old, and now you've owned it for 9 years. They know, so you have knowledge about it. So it drives me crazy when I see sellers not disclose that. Now, there is at least one attorney in town, and I think that he still does this, but he said, he does not encourage his clients to fill out seller's property disclosure. But most attorneys that I know actually tell people to fill out seller's property disclosure. Anyway, and I don't know the reason why. I probably should find out why this particular one thinks it's a bad idea, but the overwhelming majority think it's a great thing. So you should disclose as much as you can because you don't want a buyer coming back to you years later or a month later saying, hey, listen, you knew about this fact. You knew that there was XYZ wrong with the property and you didn't disclose that to me. That was a material fact. And you actually said in your contract that you are disclosing. You agree to disclose all material facts about the property. And so, I don't know, I think there's some liability there for you. I'm going to abbreviate seller's property disclosure as the initials SPD throughout this presentation. So if you see the words, the kind of letters SPD, that means seller's property disclosure. So I just want to let you know before I start using SPD that that's what I'm doing. So what I decided to do is because maybe this is kind of a dream in my head, but for some reason, I think that not every buyer, not every seller reads every single document word for word that I give them. I think a lot of people scan. And so this is your opportunity for me to go into detail. We're going to slow down, and I need to remind myself to do that a lot because I tend to talk very quickly, especially since I listen to audio from New York originally, and so I talk fast normally. But in addition to that, I listen to audiobooks at 2 times speed. And so when you I probably listen to, I don't know, 20, 25, maybe even more than that, audiobooks a year at 2 times speed. If you're listening to 300 hours of audiobooks every year at 2 times speed, you tend to get conditioned to speak a little bit faster. And so I tend to get ahead of myself and need to slow down. So I'm going to slow down myself, but we're all going to slow down collectively and go over the seller's property disclosure. I'm going to highlight some different key sections of it and explain to you what it is that you're signing, what it is that they're disclosing to you, and what's normal. So seller's property disclosure, this is right from the top of the form. It says, this form has important legal consequences and the parties should consult legal and tax or other counsel before signing. Makes sense. Seller's property disclosure residential, that's what the title says. And then this part, this disclosure should be completed by seller, not broker. So I feel like I need to do a great job to serve my clients. And on the buy side, I know 90% of my business is buyers anyway, but of the 10%, the small percentage of people that are sellers, the 2 or 3 or 4 people or so, that actually are sellers with me each year, of those small numbers, I feel really, really compelled to do a great job, right? I want to do an amazing job for them. So I feel almost guilty telling them, hey, listen, I'll do all this other paperwork for you, but this one form, seller's property disclosure, I am not allowed to fill that out for you. It says right on top of the form, I cannot do it for you. This disclosure should be completed by seller, not by broker. I mean, if I could do it for you, if I could walk around the house and disclose everything I know about the property and do it for you, and then use that, give it to you to sign, and then provide that to the buyer, that would be amazing. Unfortunately, the form itself says, don't do it. The disclosure needs to be completed by seller, not by the broker. So when you're going to buy side, you should also realize that it's probably, unless they're kind of ignoring the rules of this, it's probably not the broker filling out the form. It should be, in theory, the seller completing the seller's property disclosure and disclosing the information that they know about the property to you as the buyer. Okay, continuing on. There's more reading from the seller's property disclosure. Seller states that the information contained in this disclosure is correct to seller's current actual knowledge as of this date. Okay? Current actual knowledge. That means that as of the date you fill this out, it is what you actually know about the property to this date, currently. Okay? Any changes will be disclosed by seller to buyer promptly after discovery. So let's say you fill out the seller's property disclosure on January 1st. And on January 15th, there's a leak. You notice a leak in the window, it runs down the window, damages some drywall. You get a handyman guy out there to fix the leak, fix the window, and everything's fixed. That seller's property disclosure, is that then current? Well, it's current as the date you filled it out, but any changes that happened will be disclosed by seller to buyer promptly after discovery. So now you have a change to your seller's property disclosure. In theory, you should go back and update that seller's property disclosure to say, there was a leak on the property, here's what happened, we had it fixed, here's some photos before and after showing you that it was done in theory, but that never happens. They just really disclose it to them. And if you're under contract, you need to tell the buyer about that leak in the property, okay? Seller should disclose material facts you find on your inspection report if you provided them to them to the next buyer should you terminate. So let me paint a scenario for you. Let me ask you this question first. Does every time a property goes under contract, does it close every single time? Does 100% of the time that buyer end up, getting their funding on their property and closing on the loan and closing on it? No, obviously that does not happen. Yeah. So in most cases, you do close. I'd say, I don't know, my percentage has got to be, well above 75%. It's probably closer to 90% actually. But I'm sure that there are buyers in the past, I can think of one example, where the buyer went under contract, they had an inspection done, they found some stuff out in the inspection, they're like, I didn't know what I was getting into. I didn't realize that this property had all this stuff wrong with it and that's going to cost me all this money in order to have it fixed. So we disclosed, the buyer says, hey, listen, we found out in the inspection there's too much stuff. It's not even something I want to even get a price reduction. I'm just not willing to take it on. So I'm going to terminate the contract. I'm going to actually not agree to buy it. We're going to agree that you're going to give me my earnest money back. I'm going to move on. The information that we passed on to the seller, if we said to them, there was knob and tube wiring, which we didn't realize, which is still active underneath the house. There's some signs that there's some asbestos wrapping the furnace, which we didn't know that existed at the time. And the tile floor underneath the other floor in the basement too has asbestos tile there too. So you need to disclose that to your next person coming in. Does the seller have to tell the next buyer? What if you're the next buyer? Is that a concern to you that the seller doesn't necessarily have to disclose now that they know? They have new knowledge that there's knob and tube wiring under the house. There's new knowledge that there's asbestos wrapping the boiler and that there's asbestos tile underneath the floor in the basement. Don't you think they should disclose that information if they're now given knowledge of it? I think they should, okay? What are the consequences if they don't? What happens if the first buyer comes along, they find out all this stuff, the lead-based, the knob and tube wiring, the asbestos and the asbestos tile, and they say, we're just not going to disclose that. It wasn't my inspector that did it. I was just told, it was hearsay from the other buyer that this stuff existed. I don't feel like I need to disclose. Really? So the next buyer comes along, next buyer goes under contract, and they buy the property, and they close on it, and without knowing that there was asbestos, without knowing that there was asbestos tile, without knowing that there was knob and tube, and they live in the house for a month, and it turns out the house burns down. Knob and tube wiring catches fire, the house burns down. Is there liability for that previous seller? They can prove, in this particular example, they can prove that the knob and tube wiring is what caused it. The seller had knowledge of the knob and tube wiring. Do you think there's any liability there for that seller? Heck yeah, I think there's tons of liability there for that seller. I think they were given notice that it was disclosed to them by the first buyer that there was an Nomad 2 wire, and that was the reason why they were canceling, and that I think there was an obligation by them in order to go and disclose to the next buyer. What if the buyer, the second buyer that actually bought the property, had like a 6-year-old daughter who was living in the basement when the fire broke out and died? Is there major liability there? Oh, I think there is. I think there totally is. So I think as a seller, not only are we just contractually obligated, I think that it's in our best interest as sellers to disclose, okay? And so I think that you really should do it. Now here's kind of this weird gray area, and I'd almost like to get an attorney's opinion officially on this, but I think that they would have differing opinions. Let's say the first buyer gives a copy of the seller's property disclosure to the seller when they terminate. They say, hey, listen, here's the inspection I had. It was terminated based on this. Can the seller give a copyrighted document, a document that they don't own? It was actually owned by the previous buyer and owned by the inspector who did it. Can they pass that information on to any new buyers? I'm not sure that they can. You know, the inspector probably wants to get paid on doing the second inspection. And so I'm not sure that they would voluntarily say, yeah, you can pass it around to anyone you want. I don't know. Something to think about. Okay, so that's seller's property disclosure. Oh, we got a note here. Just talked to a guy whose sister walked away from a purchase after the inspection showed a damaged foundation that didn't show up in the SPD. Yeah, that's a great point. Is it possible that a seller sincerely, truly, honestly does not know? You know, they had a rental property. The tenants were not putting down the downspouts on all the stuff outside over the last 4 or 5. The seller, he says, seller knows. But is it possible a seller could not know that they had a rental property? The tenants who lived there for 5 years never put the downspouts on. They kept them up because they didn't want their kids stepping on them. It was hard to mow the lawn, and so all the water just kind of went down right around the foundation. And over the last 5 years, there ended up being cracks in the foundation. Sure. It's possible that a seller could not know, legitimately, honestly, not trying to be deceptive. In that case, they've given their current actual knowledge. They really did not know about it. In this case, according to Elijah, they actually did know. So I don't think that's very cool. I think that that's troubling at best. Troubling at least, I should say. Okay. Continuing reading on. So seller hereby receipts. All you're doing when you're basically giving this to them is the seller hereby receipts for a copy of this disclosure. If the property is part of a common interest community, an HOA, this disclosure is limited to the property or unit yourself. So if you happen to know that there's something going on in the HOA or something weird like that, except in section L, and section L talks about stuff about the HOA, but except for that section here, this is really the knowledge about the actual unit. Not the unit next door, not the other unit down the street, anything like that. It's really just about this particular property, except Section L. Section L deals with HOA common stuff and everything like that. Broker may deliver a copy of this disclosure to prospective buyers. So a seller is acknowledging, hey, listen, this is going to go out to every buyer. Okay, so buyers that are interested, we're going to give them a copy of this disclosure. And I'm going to talk about how I do it in my business and what I think is the best practice. But the seller is giving the broker permission to go out and give this to buyers immediately. They're disclosing this. Anything they put on here is going to be seen by prospective buyers of the property. Continuing on. Note, if an item is not present at the property, or if an item is not to be included in the sale, mark the NA column. So if you're going down there and it says hot tub, and you're not including the hot tub in the sale, then you should actually mark NA. You shouldn't necessarily say the condition of the hot tub. However, what if you did? What if you wrote down on there, hot tub, excellent working condition? Amazing, great stuff, right? It's working, everything's working perfect. Does that mean that you are including the hot tub in the sale? Well, that's what this next section covers. The contract to buy and sell real estate, not this disclosure form, the contract, not the disclosure, not the seller's property disclosure, determines whether an item is included or excluded. So it doesn't matter if you say the hot tub's in awesome condition, it's working great. You can't say, wait a minute, Mr. Seller, you said the hot tub was great on the seller's property disclosure, so obviously it's included. No, 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 no. The seller's property disclosure says to you that the contract determines whether or not it is included or excluded. And if there is an inconsistency between this form, the seller's property disclosure, and the contract, guess what? The contract wins. So it says if for some reason we've said something on here, but we say something else in the contract automatically supersedes it because that is what we agreed to on the seller's property disclosure. It is what we are acknowledging. Okay. So here's an example screenshot of the seller's property disclosure. I'm just going to kind of point out it's the date that you fill it out, the property address, full street name, city, state, zip code, the seller, and then it shows all these different things on here to kind of show you the thing. And it's kind of broken into sections. So this is the improvement section, section A, or one improvement, section A, structural conditions. And then it says, do you do any, oh, by the way, this form, there's some parts of this form that's written kind of weird. So you do have to read it because there's some parts where you're like, you want to answer yes when you really mean no, and other parts where you want to say no and you really mean yes. So you got to read what they're asking. And some of the questions are a little tricky. You can't just go down and say yes to everything, okay? So structural conditions. Do any of the following conditions now exist or have they ever existed? Not have they been resolved so they don't really exist anymore. Have they ever existed? So were there ever, do structural problems, do they exist now or have they ever existed? Yes or no, or don't know, or NA, or comments. So you can kind of mark off yes or no, or I really don't know, or it's not applicable. There's no structural system here. You know, that's kind of like what NA means. And then any comments. And you should describe, yeah, we had a small hairline crack. We had an engineer come out and fix it, and it's all been resolved. They should know about that. You should make comments. Were there any, do they now exist? Moisture and or water problems, do any now exist, or have they ever existed? Did we ever have any moisture or water problems? Has there ever been, is there now damage to termites, or has there ever been damage from termites or other insects or birds or animals or rodents? So my house at one point had squirrels in the attic. So if I ever sold this property and I had to fill out a seller's property disclosure, should I say, were there any damage due to termites, other insects, birds, animals, or rodents? What do I need to now say on that? I need to say that there were, because at one point in time, we had a squirrel bite their way whole through the soffit or whatever they call that thing that's right on the roof to allow them to get access to it. And they had gone in there and had, you know, they actually had little tiny babies up there as far as I know. I didn't go up there and do it. I hired a guy to come and do the cage where you can exit but can't go back in. And they basically put that on there for a month or so, and then they came back up and they patched the hole so they couldn't go back in. But now I have to disclose that because it's not, I have squirrels now. I don't have any squirrels right now. But has it ever existed? Sure, it does. Damage due to hail, wind, fire, flood, cracks, heaving or settling problems, exterior wall or window problems, you know, exterior artificial stucco, any additions or alterations made. So do any additions or alterations exist now, or have they ever existed? Building code, city or county violations. The section on the SPD to disclose source of water for property. So on the SPD itself is a spot that says, what is the source of water for this particular property? And as an aside, so usually people tell me I do not have an accent. However, whenever I say water, people actually say I have an accent. So that's like my one tell sort of word when people are like, where are you from? And then they kind of make fun of me because I say water weird. So anyway, section on SPD to disclose the source of water for the property. This, in my opinion, is becoming very important. If you go watch like documentaries on Netflix and things like that about the significance and importance of where we are getting our water from for our properties. And so it is becoming important to know who is providing the water to this property. Is it from a well? Is it from a certain source of water that we don't, it's kind of sketchy? Is it, you know, City of Fort Collins, which we have a lot of confidence in? Where is it? And I think it's becoming important to disclose the source of water. And if it's not disclosed on here, on the seller's property disclosure, then we need, in my opinion, to have a source of water addendum that does disclose the source of water. And it's up to the seller to provide that. But most of the time as the buyer, I'd like to know. I'd like to know where the water for the property is coming from. And of course, we can go check it out and find out. But a lot of times we want the seller to tell us just so that we know for sure. All right, continuing on. Seller and buyer understand that the real estate brokers do not warrant or guarantee the above information. So a seller goes and they give you this form and they say, you know, here's all the information I have at the property. And I'm, as a real estate broker, I'm giving this to my buyer. do I personally, James Orr, as a real estate broker helping my buyer client buy this property, am I saying, I guarantee, I warrant, I say whatever the seller is saying on here is 100% true and accurate and complete, and there's nothing missing? Do I promise that? No, because I don't have any knowledge of what the seller put on there. You know, in some cases, I'm not reading this, right? Because do I have any expertise here? Am I going to be able to say, oh, wait, the seller missed filling out this line. He really should have filled this out. Should I go and do that? It almost implies that I am managing and kind of overseeing the seller, and that if I miss something else, now I think you could say, hey, listen, you read this form. You told me he was missing this one thing. Why didn't you catch this other thing he was missing? I didn't know. Okay, so we're telling you on the form itself, real estate brokers do not warrant or guarantee the above information on the property. Property inspection services may be purchased and are advisable. In case this is not written strongly enough, I strongly recommend on every single property that you buy, you get a property inspection done by a professional. Someone whose job it is to go and inspect properties for a living. They've seen dozens of properties this month, and they're good at doing this. They're kind of knowledgeable about the area. They're taking classes and they learn how to do it. I am not qualified to look at every house. Have I seen a ton of houses? Sure. Did my father do a ton of buy, fix up, and resell type properties, fix and flip properties when I was younger? And do I have a lot of knowledge just kind of like from that? Sure. Did I do a lot of fix and flip properties? I've done a few, not a crazy number. So I am really not qualified. I don't work at Home Depot. I don't know about anything like that. That is not my area of expertise. Now, do I see stuff? Sure. Am I can I be relied upon instead of paying a property inspector? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Do not rely on me to do all your inspection stuff. You need to get a property inspector in there and do that. And so the seller's property disclosure tells everybody in the transaction, property inspection services may be purchased. Hey, listen, guys, public service announcement. You can get property inspections done, okay? And not only are they available to be purchased, they are advisable. We recommend it. It's written right in the form from the state of Colorado. State of Colorado says, guess what? Best practice, get a property inspection done. That's what they're telling you. You should go and do it, okay? This form is not intended as a substitute for inspection of the property. You shouldn't say, hey, listen, the seller gave me a seller's property inspection, a seller's property disclosure. I don't need to get an inspection. Look, he filled this whole thing out. He wrote a ton of detail on here. Yeah, he did write a ton of detail on there, but maybe not. Maybe he's not qualified really to comment on some stuff that your inspector is. So it is not a substitute for you getting an inspection yourself. Okay. Now, I kind of make a little joke of this, but it's really serious. If there's a section in a contract or section on a form, and it's in bold and it's in all caps, you might think to yourself, hey, this is in bold and it's in all caps. This might possibly be important. Maybe I'm guessing, maybe they just, accidentally hit the shift key and accidentally kind of, hit the bold kind of feature on their word processor when they're typing in, and they held down the shift key, or maybe they left cap locks on and they typed the whole section out in bold and caps and they kind of just left it there after they went back through and proofread it like 90 million times. Maybe that happened. Not likely. It's probably an important thing. And so this might be an important thing, okay? Advisory to seller. Failure to disclose a known material defect may result in legal liability. So the Colorado Real Estate Commission tells the sellers in the form they're supposed to fill out, listen, if you actually accidentally, in quotes, if you accidentally leave off a material defect, a known material defect about the property, hey, listen, this might result in some legal liability for you. Please step up and actually do what you're supposed to do and disclose the information to the buyer, okay? So this is why I kind of call this, although it may not technically be it, the CYA form for the seller to come clean and disclose all that they know about the property. This is sort of like the way that the Colorado Real Estate Commission says to you, hey, listen, come clean. This is your chance. Anything you tell us on here, we're not going to come back later and say, you didn't tell us that the property had meth or the property had mold or the property did blah, 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 okay? Just realize that. All right, seller's property disclosure. The information contained in this disclosure has been furnished by seller. That's where it's coming from. Who certifies to the truth thereof based on seller's current actual knowledge. So basically saying the seller is providing you this information, they're saying it's true, and it is based on the seller's current actual knowledge. And there's a spot on there for the seller to sign. Now, at the bottom, there's an advisory to buyers. Might be important. Let's kind of read what the advisory to the buyer is. Number one, even though the seller has answered the above questions to the seller's current actual knowledge, the buyer should thoroughly inspect the property. Remember, we talked about this. Get the inspection done. And obtain expert assistance to accurately and fully evaluate the property. Maybe you looking at it is not enough, Mr. Buyer. Maybe you should go get an engineer if the structure kind of looks a little shaky to you, or something doesn't look right, or you don't understand something, okay? To confirm the status of the following matters. And then it has a list. Here are some things that the Colorado Real Estate Commission thinks might be important to you as a buyer. A, the physical condition of the property. Okay, you know, anything physically that's going on with the property, that's important. Maybe you should get an expert to obtain expert assistance to accurately and fully evaluate the physical condition of the property. Makes sense to me. B, the presence of mold or other biological factors. Hey, listen, there's mold in Colorado. It's a naturally growing thing that happens when things are moist and dark. When things are moist, mold grows. So if you have any concerns about mold, maybe you should get someone in there who can inspect for mold or give you an opinion about the mold status of the property. But I'm telling you, mold exists in most properties. It may be like really small amounts and very harmless stuff, but there is mold in almost all stuff. I mean, think about it. Even new construction, a lot of the stuff that they're using as building materials, it lays around outside in the rain. That's where mold grows. So expect there to be mold or other biological hazards, and it's telling you this. C, the presence of rodents, insects, and vermin, including termites. Question for you. Do termites exist in Colorado? Termites in Colorado? I don't know. I've not heard of many of those, but I have heard of some. We've had some inspectors go under houses, 100-year-old houses, and told me that there's termite damage in the property. But wait a minute. People tell me all the time, we don't test for termites. There's no termites in Colorado. Termites don't exist. Oh, I'm not so sure. Okay? So the Colorado Real Estate Commission says to you, hey, listen, you may want to check to see if there's a presence of rodents, insects, and vermin, including termites. It's not normal for us in our marketplace to test for termites. Do termites exist? Probably. It's just probably not super common. So if you have any concern over whether termites exist, then you can get a termite inspection done if you have your proper inspection clause in your contract, which the overwhelming majority of the time we're doing, okay? Now, we're not usually testing for termites, but you can, and it tells you, discloses to you that you should. D, the legal use of the property and legal access to the property. So you want to create a boarding house, and you want to have, you're looking at a 6-bedroom property, and you're like, you know, I'm going to put a bunk bed in each one of these rooms, and we're going to rent it out, 2 to a room, each 6-bedroom. I'm going to have 12 people there. They're each going to pay me $500 a month. This is going to be a cash cow. It's a $350,000 6-bedroom property. I'm going to rent out. I'm going to be making $6,000 a month by renting out these bedrooms to 2 different people. It's going to cash flow like crazy. It's amazing. Well, guess what? In Fort Collins, at least, there's this thing called the U+2 law, which means it can only be you plus 2 other people that you are not related to living in the property at a time. It's going to be really hard to get 12 tenants in a property, okay? So this is them telling you, you should obtain expert assistance accurately and fully evaluate the property, including the legal use, whether you can legally use this as a boarding house, okay? And there's less really extreme examples. Also, legal access to the property. If you're buying a property, properties are not required to have a way for you to get to it, okay? Most properties do, right? They've got a road, the kind of driveway goes to the edge of the road, and you're able to access it. But there are properties that you can be landlocked. You can be between stuff. And then how do you get to it? If you're concerned about it, they tell you, check the legal access to the property. How can you get there? The availability and source of water, sewer, and utilities. This may seem like another obvious one, but there's a situation where I had a client who works from home, needed high-speed internet access, and the only thing they had going to that property was not Comcast or any type of fiber or anything like that. It was only a satellite connection, which was really slow. That was a big deal for them. And so they were not interested in that particular property because of that. So this is your chance to go check for that. F, the environmental and geological condition of the property. You know, environmentally and geologically, is the property sound and something you want to buy? Consider that. G, the presence of noxious weeds. So when I taught this class live last time, somebody in the room actually said this is a real big problem. I was not aware that there are certain plants that once they start growing, it's really hard to get them to stop growing. And they can be very damaging to, you know, other plants in your yard and you know, even like crawling up your house and doing damage to stuff. So apparently this is a big deal, and I was not aware of that. And H, any other matters that may affect buyer's use and ownership of the property that are important to buyer as buyer decides whether to purchase the property. This is kind of like the catch-all. Hey, listen, if there's anything else important to you, this is your chance. You should go have this checked out, okay? And it tells you this right in the seller's property disclosure. Continuing on, 2, seller states that the information is correct to seller's current actual knowledge as of the date of this form. So at the very top of the page has the date. The term current actual knowledge is intended to limit seller's disclosure only to facts actually known by the seller. So this isn't stuff that says you should have known that the property had foundation issues. You had to actually know that the property had foundation issues. It's not, well, everybody knows that, you know, tile built that are this size in a basement, you know, during this age of construction, everybody knows that those are asbestos. I'm not so sure. A seller doesn't actually need to know what everyone knows. They need to have current actual knowledge, and they're intended to limit them to those facts, okay? It does not include constructive knowledge or common knowledge or what seller should have known about the property. The seller has no duty to inspect the property. So, seller's sitting at the kitchen table. They're filling out the seller's property disclosure. Are they required to go down the basement and look around and be triggered mentally? Oh, yeah, that's right. This wall had a leak at one point. Or, oh, look, there's kind of a water stain on this thing below the window. Are they required to actually go downstairs and check around the house? Or to climb up on the roof and look for hail damage? Or to, you know, look at the date of the furnace, or see if there's any cracks around piping, or do anything like that? Are they required to do that? The form tells you. It tells you, look, the seller has no duty to inspect the property when the disclosure is filled in and signed. They don't have to go and get an inspection done. They don't have to go inspect it themselves. Not required. It's whatever their current actual knowledge is as of the date of this form. Number 3. Valuable information may be obtained from various local, state, and federal agencies, and other experts may assist buyer by performing more specific evaluation inspections of the property. So let's talk about this. Could you call up the county and ask them, hey, listen, I'm thinking about buying this property. At some point in the future, I'm going to rent it out because I'm a nomad. They don't know what a nomad means, by the way, but you tell them, hey, listen, I'm going to buy this property. They live there for a year, and they're probably going to convert it to a rental. Do you see any problem with me renting this property out? Might they be able to tell you something? It says, I don't see anything problem with that. It sounds good to me. Or, hey, there's a U+2 law in our town, or there's a U+3 law in our town, or yeah, there's a problem with student rentals in that part of property or part of the area, or no, you cannot have rentals in that area, or whatever it is. You know, are there other local, state, and federal agencies that might be able to tell you stuff about maybe floodplains or things like that? Sure. And are there other experts that may assist the buyer in performing more specific evaluations? If you wanted to get a mold test, maybe you want to get an industrial hygienist out there. If you want to get a radon test, maybe you get a home inspector who does radon. If you want to get some meth tests, maybe you get an industrial hygienist out there. Okay? More specific evaluation inspections of the property. 4, boundaries, location, and ownership of fences, driveways, hedges, and other similar features of the property may become the subjects of a dispute between a property owner and a neighbor. Hey, listen, they're warning you up front. You know that driveway that you think you own, that's sort of between your house and the other one? That driveway that you think that you own because, hey, listen, it's got to be my driveway. I've got a garage in back. That's obviously mine. Oh, not so fast. I had a client who bought a property in Old Town Greeley, and between the two properties was a driveway. And the driveway at the back had 2 garages. The garages happened to be on each of the others. The garages were on each property's property, each owner's property. So the garage for property A was on property A's garage, and the garage for property B was on property B's property. for owner B's property. But the driveway went right between the house, and it actually went to both garages. Who owned the driveway? Well, as it turns out in this case, there was a shared driveway agreement on public record, and their property line went right down the middle of the driveway. So neither had enough space on their property in order to have the car drive through. But between the two of them, they made an agreement, and they put it on public record saying, we agree to have this there. But there was a dispute. There was, in fact, a dispute on this particular property. What happened was my client had bought the property, and he knew about the shared driveway. He was aware of it, and everything was going great. The owner of the other property eventually, years later, sold their property to an investor, and the investor started renting out the property. And the new investor didn't quite do their homework, and so they thought they owned the driveway. And so they told their tenant, it's your driveway. You can drive on it. You can park in the driveway. And there were some parking issues in this particular property. So the tenant was constantly parking in the middle of the driveway, preventing my client's tenant, who was also a rental property, from driving the driveway and parking in the back by their garage. Turned into a pretty big dispute, okay? So a survey may be used to determine the likelihood of such problems. It's telling you, hey, listen, if you've got a question about property lines, or is my fence on my property, or is the fence on the other neighbor's property, or whatever it is, if you've got any concerns about that, it's telling you, get a survey. A survey may be used to determine the likelihood of such problems. So it's encouraging you, maybe you should get a survey of that. Elijah says, is the U+2 something that should be included on the SPD for Fort Collins? It is a separate disclosure we usually do on properties sold or rented in Fort Collins. There's a form for it. If you go search City of Fort Collins U+2 or occupancy limits, there's the sample of the form on the City of Fort Collins website for you, which should be included, so we disclose it separately. Yeah, you probably could put it on there, but I would disclose it somewhere else for me, because that's the form we normally use. Number 5, whether any item is included or excluded is determined by the contract between buyer and seller and not the seller's property disclosure. Hey, listen, Dumbo, in case you didn't read the top of the form, we're telling you again that the item being included or not is not this form. It is what's said in the contract itself. So it's like, hey, listen, you didn't read the first part, so maybe you'll read the second part. Okay. 6, buyer acknowledges that seller does not warrant that the property is fit for buyer's intended purposes. Seller doesn't say, hey, listen, oh yeah, you want to make a boarding house to this? Sounds like a great idea to me. Okay. They're telling you, though, in writing that they do not say that you can absolutely do that. They didn't go check the rules. They don't know what the occupancy limits are. They don't have to. It's not their job. Or use of the property. Oh, I want to buy this property and I want to tear it down and I'm going to build a little mini football stadium right there. Yeah, I'm not so sure about that. Okay, you need to go check that out yourself. You need to do your own due diligence. It's not the seller that says, yeah, you could totally use that property for this, and they're having you sign it in writing. So even if a seller says to you verbally, yeah, I totally think you can do that, they're telling you in writing that they don't know. Okay. Buyer acknowledges that seller's indication that an item is working is not to be construed as a warranty. So you go buy the property, and the seller wrote in the seller's property disclosure statement that the dishwasher was working. Okay. As soon as you move in, the dishwasher no longer works. Okay. Not a single time. The day you move in, it decides, that's it. I'm done. I'm giving up the ghost. The dishwasher is no longer working. Is the seller required to come in and pay to have the dishwasher working so that it works at least once you own the property? No. It says seller's indication the item is working is not to be construed as a warranty of its continued operability, or as a representation or warranty that such item is fit for buyer's intended purposes. Okay? It doesn't say that it has to work, which is one of the reasons why some buyers and some sellers get home warranties. Okay? Some sellers, they use it as a way. It says, listen, it was working when I actually fill out this form, but there's a possibility the furnace is going to work, the AC is not going to work, the hot water heater is not going to work, the dishwasher is not going to work, the stove, the microwave, all these things, the toilet, all these things could end up not working. Don't call me after closing. In fact, I really don't want you to call me, so I'm willing to pay a third-party company, a home warranty company, that it's going to be their problem. They're going to take your phone call, and they're going to deal with it for you. And I'm willing to pay money, sellers say. I'm willing to pay money in order to buy one of these things for my buyer so that I don't have that problem. It's not my problem anymore. Call the home warranty company. I provided you one. Okay? Some buyers choose to buy them themselves, and some real estate agents will opt to buy home warranties either for their sellers or for their buyers as part of the service that they offer. It is not common for me to do that. Okay? I have done it before in very rare circumstances. You know, a first-time home buyer who's really, really, really tight on down payment money is going to buy a house, and during the inspection, we find out that the furnace is going to go any day, the AC is going to go any day. You know, there's all sorts of issues with the property, and it would be a real significant financial strain on that particular buyer if any one of those issues went. I might just voluntarily say, okay, in this really unusual, rare circumstance, this buyer is, you know, I really want to help them. I feel like they're sort of like a little sister to me. I want to make sure that they're, you know, taken care of when they buy the property. I don't want them to get stuck with a, you know, $2,000 furnace repair bill. I will go ahead and personally chip in money out of my commission in order to make sure that they have a home warranty on the property. And if anything comes up, they'll be able to deal with it. And I've done that in the past, but it is not normal. So if you're a client of mine, realize that that is not normal for me to buy home warranties for you. It's a very unusual circumstance, like 1 in 50 transactions. Extremely uncommon, okay? Number 7, buyer hereby receipts for a copy of this disclosure. Guess what? You are acknowledging you've received this. That's what you're signing for. And there's a spot for the buyer to sign and acknowledge receipt, okay? So that's pretty much the form. Now, this is the overview of my buying process. If you remember from previous classes, I kind of walk you through the steps that are involved, in the buying process. The steps include the first meeting. That's when you and I, as a buyer, we sit down, we go over what the buying process looks like, and I cover that in another class. Go look at the videos. Premium Nomads can go watch the previous video where I kind of talk about that. The next step is during pre-showings. But, you know, after we've met for the first time, but before we're actually out looking at properties, there's some things you need to do. A little bit of homework, like get qualified for a lender and, you know, do some stuff like that. That's the pre-showing phase, you know, when we're kind of requesting showings, stuff like that. Then there's the showings when we're actually out looking at properties. Then there's the writing of the offer. You looked at a property, you decide this one looks really interesting. I'd like to write an offer on it. That's the writing offer phase. Then we have contract to close. Once an offer is accepted and we're waiting to close on it, that's contract to close. And then we have the closing. When you actually show up, you sign your docs, you take ownership of the property. And then we have all the stuff that happens after closing. So what part of the buying process are we in for the seller's property disclosure? What does the seller's property disclosure touch? Does it touch the first meeting? No, not really. Does it touch the pre-showings? I think it might. And I'm going to talk about that. Does it touch when we're actually out looking at properties? I think it does. What about when we're writing the offer? Absolutely. And what about when we're under contract waiting to close? Absolutely. So these are the 4 stages that the seller's property disclosure touches during the buying process, okay? So let's talk about pre-showings. Pre-showings related to the seller's property disclosure. When we're looking at properties in the MLS on my site's the search tool we use. We send properties to you. They show up in your kind of inbox. You go look at them on the web and you say, okay, you know, I like this one. I don't like this one. I make notes on it, whatever it is. If the seller's agent posted the seller's property disclosure to Iris, which is our MLS, and authorized to show it up on my site, you can, as a client of mine, under the My Site section, look up the listing documents section and see the seller's property disclosure. So you'll be able to pull it up and look through it and say, okay, yeah, I see what they're disclosing. That looks good. And it also has, just as an aside note, it has additional documents like the source of water, square footage disclosure, floor plans, lead-based paint disclosure. So it has a lot of those in there as well, if the seller's agent made them public, which is unfortunately relatively uncommon, okay? If you don't have access to my site for some reason for the property, like let's say you were driving by and you found a property, you know, driving through a neighborhood or something like that, or if the seller didn't upload it or something like that, you can email us, and I'm going to give you a hint. If you're emailing me in order to get this document, it might be faster most weeks. Tammy's out of town this week, so it's faster to email me. But most weeks, it's probably faster to email Tammy, who's sitting at her computer the majority of the day, kind of dealing with paperwork and going to keeping on our computer and looking at things, where I tend to be out with clients, meeting with them, you know, showing houses, attending closings, doing things like that. So if you want it a little bit faster, the hint is email Tammy, and you can get a copy of it. All right, contract to close. This is not contract to close. This should actually say showings. So showing, seller's property disclosure. When we're scheduling showings for you, often it's because a property has already been sent to you via email and my site, and you requested to go see it. So normally we send the email out. You say, I would like to see that property. You email me back. I say, great, let's go see the property. If the seller's property disclosure was uploaded to the MLS by the seller's agent and the seller's agent authorized it to show up, it may be in my site for you already. But if it's not in my site, and if the seller's agent did upload it, but maybe didn't authorize it, you can email us and I can get you a copy of it. Or as part of our normal process when we schedule showings for you, we tend to go look for them and send them to you as well. So it could be helpful to look at this ahead of time to check out areas mentioned in the seller's property disclosure. And I will tell you, most clients do not do this. So here's how this should work in theory. You say, listen, I want to go see property at 1234 Main Street. We say, great, we're going to set that up for you. We send you out a copy of the seller's property disclosure. There's my puppy. And you can see the seller's property disclosure when we go look at the property. And while you're looking at it, you say, hey, listen, they mentioned that they had a leak in the basement. Let's go take a look at the leak. Because now you know. And you can go look at it while you're there instead of going through the effort of going under contract and then finding out during, once you're under contract, that you have to go look at it with an inspector and see it. You can go get tipped off and look at things that the seller has disclosed. Most clients do not do this. All right, writing offer. Apparently I had contract to close in multiple ones here, so I'm going to need to fix that. All right, writing offer. Seller's property disclosure. If the seller's agent uploaded the seller's property disclosure, as we prepare to write you an offer, we usually send you a copy of the seller's property disclosure via email so that you can read through it prior to signing the offer. I'd rather know before you commit to buying the property if you're going to have a problem with the seller's property disclosure rather than wait until after you're under contract to say, oh, had I only read it, I would have known that this thing was a meth house before and they mitigated it. Or, you know, they've had mold issues in the past. I don't want to deal with mold. I've got small kids. It's just not something I want to risk. I'll go find another property. I'd rather know that. So it may affect what you offer. You may say, hey, I'm okay with that, but I want to get it for $10K less because of that. Or even if you offer at all, you may say, I'm just not interested. I'm passing. Okay. Use it to help determine what, if any, due diligence documents you may want to see. They may say we had the property mitigated for mold. Okay. I would like to see receipts of who did it and what their warranty is on. And so we're going to request that as due diligence documents as part of our offer. And so you want to go look at the seller's property disclosure ahead of time to know what due diligence documents you are going to request in the contract itself based on what you find out from the SPD. Okay. We will include the SPD in the DocuSign envelope for you to sign with your offer. So we're going to send it over to you via email so you can see it ahead of time. But when we prepare the package, the DocuSign envelope for you to go and sign the offer, we are going to include that with the DocuSign envelope for you to sign. So you're going to acknowledge receipt at that point via DocuSign. Now, in a lot of cases, the seller's agent did not upload the seller's property disclosure to IRIS, to the MLS. And so we don't have it. There's nothing I can give you. So there's nothing to send to you or for you to sign with your offer yet. But most clients will then request the seller's property disclosure as part of the offer. They will say in the contract, I want you to deliver to me a copy of a seller's property disclosure within 2 days of us going under contract or 3 days of us going under contract. Okay. If the property, here's an important note, if the property was listed before, like let's say this is the 4th time it's sold in the MLS, and the previous seller's agent uploaded copies of the seller's property disclosure to the MLS, so not the time that it's for sale now, but maybe the agent that represented the previous seller or the seller before that, or even the seller before that 10 years ago, if they uploaded a copy to the MLS, we will usually send you over those as well so that you can see what previous sellers disclosed. Now, I don't actually think most agents are doing this, and I think it's a mistake. I think it's actually a big mistake that some real estate agents are not looking out for their clients, looking back over the past transactions that happened with that property and trying to give their buyer the best view of what the whole history of this property was. Because here's what happens. Okay, imagine again, we have 4 sales. Okay, we have one property it's currently for sale right now. It was sold 2 years ago, sold 3 years before that, and it was sold like 4 years before that. So 15 years ago, whatever that number is, there was an original sale. And let's say 15 years ago, the seller actually had a seller's property disclosure and said, hey, listen, we had a problem with this property. When we first moved in, a year after we first moved in, we had the biggest flood we've ever had, and the basement actually filled up with water. It was like 2 feet high. And so we were on vacation. When we got back, we went down the basement. We're like, it smells really musty in here. We go down the basement, and sure enough, there's standing water been sitting in the basement for a couple days. So we immediately made an insurance claim. We had the insurance guys go out, and they came in and they mitigated the house, and they did some mold mitigation and stuff like that. But we've constantly had issues with mold in the basement behind the walls. And unless you go in there and you kind of clean out behind the wall once a year or so, there's a possibility for us to get some mold growth in there. We've never really been able to fix this. And we're disclosing it to you so that the new buyer knows that. Okay? So new buyer comes in, says, okay, that's no problem. I'm okay with that. I'll fix it out. I'll clean it out every year. And let's say that's a 70-year-old grandma who buys the property then. 70-year-old grandma lives in the property for a decade, and she eventually passes on. And her estate sells the property. And so the estate says, I've never lived in a property. There's no seller's property disclosure on this property. So the next buyer comes along and says, looks great. Everything looks perfect. Grandma took great care of the property. Everything looks amazing. And so they buy it from grandma, and now they're the third people to kind of live there. They live there for another 4 years or whatever I said before, and then they go to sell the property, and they do a very complete, comprehensive seller's property disclosure. But guess what? They never had knowledge of this early on mold issue because they didn't look at the seller's property disclosure from 2 times ago, and grandma didn't disclose anything to them, and they felt as though grandma did a great job. I mean, the property looked great. They had an inspection done. No one noticed anything. And so in good faith, they didn't fill out anything. But the fourth person to buy, this fourth buyer, they may have a mold issue on their hands. They may have a property that the first person, the first seller says, I'm disclosing this to everybody. This was a real issue. And unless you're cleaning it out every year, it's going to be a major issue at some point because this mold is just going to keep growing. Okay? So now you can see scenarios where if you're not looking at the seller's property disclosure, even situations where there's no malicious intent, there's no one trying to get you, but just through circumstances, we have situations where you lose information and you don't have the full breadth of knowledge that you should have. And I think as an agent, working with my buyers, I have an obligation to do the best job I can for my buyers. And so one of the things I want to do is I want to go look through the history of every time that property was for sale, and I want to share with them seller's property disclosures from every previous transaction I have. Now, are there situations where they did not upload them? Absolutely. There are a lot of situations. It's very uncommon to see old seller property disclosures on here, but they do show up. They definitely exist, and you definitely can go look at them and see them. Okay? So you want to go and try to find those if you can and share those with clients. All right. Contract to close. This one's correct. Contract to close, seller's property disclosure. So if the seller's agent uploaded to the seller's property disclosure, see both situations below. If the seller's agent did not upload the SPD, okay, so if they didn't upload it at all, we often request a copy of the seller's property disclosure as part of the offer, and we use seller's property disclosure deadline. It's a deadline right in the contract for doing that. You'll need to sign it and acknowledge receipt once we get it. Okay, so once we receive it, you'll sign it, we'll send it back, and we've acknowledged receipt of that. But for both situations, use the SPD during the inspection. So once we're under contract, you're going to take that seller's property disclosure with you when you meet the home inspector, because you're going to get a home inspection done, right? So you're going to go meet the home inspector, and you're going to bring your seller's property disclosure. You're also going to bring what's called a clue report from your insurance agent, which shows you all the insurance claims that were made on the property. Another way to kind of check any issues that happen with the property. But you're going to go do that with your home inspector, and you're going to look closer at the items that they point out in that seller's property disclosure with your inspector. So your inspector is going to go view it and say, "Oh yeah, I see what you mean. I wouldn't have seen that, but now that I knew that they had problems with it before, I see what they did, and it's okay, or you might have problems with that in the future. Here's what I would recommend you do to fix it. It's going to cost you about $200, and now you know, and you can work through it." Okay? Or use the SPD when talking to the insurance agent about getting insurance quotes, so you can send over a copy to them, and they can see the information about type of wiring, any mold issues, any what do they call that? Aluminum wiring or knob and tube wiring or plumbing issues, galvanized piping or polybutanol or whatever they call that thing, you could see any issues that the seller put on there so that the insurance agent can make you the correct quote and properly insure your property. And then you might also compare the SPD with the home inspection report to kind of get a more comprehensive picture before you make any inspection objection issues there. Okay, dates are important. We're primarily going to be discussing one date, the seller's property disclosure, but the seller's property disclosure may actually impact the inspection objection deadline. That's when you make an objection based on the inspection stuff. Your property insurance objection deadline, if you're going to get an insurance quote, you might want to have your insurance agent look at that SPD. Due diligence documents, if you're going to request certain due diligence documents, you may want to request those after you kind of get the SPD and you say, listen, I didn't realize there was an issue. I'm now requesting a due diligence document, or I'm going to object to the contract. So they may impact other things, but we're primarily dealing with the SPD deadline, the seller's property disclosure deadline. So what is each deadline? It's as defined in the Colorado, the contract to buy and sell real estate. How does it relate to the SPD? In most cases, the seller's property disclosure is the deadline for receiving it, okay? And then what are buyers typically doing for each, and what am I doing as your real estate broker? Okay, so section 10.1 of the contract. Section 10.1 says seller's property disclosure. On or before the seller's property disclosure deadline, the seller agrees to deliver to buyer the most current version of the applicable Colorado Real Estate Commission's seller's property disclosure form. So this comes into play. Let's say a property goes on the market in December of 2016, and let's say January of 2017, the Real Estate Commission comes out with a new version of the seller's property disclosure form. Does the seller need to fill out a new form? Yes, they do, okay? Because it says right there, the most current version of the applicable Colorado Real Estate Commission seller's property disclosure form, completed by the seller, not by the broker, to seller's actual knowledge, current as of the date of this contract. That's different than what we had before. Different as before, it was the date that they were filling it out. So if there's anything that's changed, anything that's new, that's not current, now, according to the date of the contract, it has to be updated. Interesting, interesting, interesting. 10.2, disclosure of latent defects, present condition. This is again from the Colorado Real Estate Commission contract. Section 10.2, disclosure of latent defects and present condition. Seller must disclose to buyer any latent defects actually known by seller. So when you sign the contract and you make it, the seller is agreeing, I must. Doesn't say should, maybe, will, sort of, kind of when I get around to it. Seller must disclose to buyer any latent defects actually known by seller. So if the seller has knowledge, they have to, according to the contract. Seller agrees that disclosure of latent defects will be in writing. It is not enough to say, oh, by the way, there's something wrong with the roof. Okay? Must be in writing. Except as otherwise provided in this contract, buyer acknowledges that seller is conveying the property to the buyer in as is condition, where is, and with all faults. So in case you were wondering, should I write, I'm selling the property to you in as is condition? It already says it. The buyer acknowledges seller is conveying the property to buyer in an as is condition, where is, and with all faults. It's right in the contract already. You do not need to add additional language saying you're buying the property as is. It's already there. All right, dates and deadlines groups. So we're talking about seller's property disclosure dates. This is the only deadline in this group. Seller's property disclosure deadline, we often use either completed, if we've already received a copy of seller's property disclosure, like the agent uploaded it ahead of time, we've already gotten it, so we do not need to have a deadline for it. We would normally put completed in the deadline date for that instead. Or if we're waiting for it, we might say MEC plus 2 days. 2 days after we all agree we're under contract, everyone's signed and it's been delivered, okay? It's usually you usually want the actual SPD in your hands before your inspection. So you don't want to go and order an inspection, have it be on day 1. You want to say, I get the SPD on day 2. Once I get that, I'm going to need my inspector out there 2 days later or 3 days later, and it's going to be after I got the SPD. Okay, so what we're doing as your real estate agents, we are coordinating with the seller's agent for this deadline. We're coordinating with the seller's agent to get you a copy of the seller's property disclosure if we don't have it already. If you decide you want to terminate prior to your inspection objection deadline, based on what you find in the SPD, we would prepare a notice to terminate and the earnest money release for you. So you get your earnest money back, okay? If you're requesting additional due diligence documents based on what you find in the SPD, we're preparing an amend extend, adjusting due diligence dates, and requesting the due diligence documents you need. So that's what we're doing for the seller's property disclosure deadline for you. Now, what are you doing as the buyer? You are initialing and signing the seller's property disclosure via DocuSign, acknowledging that you've received it. I've acknowledged the seller's given me this, I'm good to go. You're reviewing the current seller's property disclosure, ideally before your inspection, so you can look at items of concern with your inspector. Hey, I want to point out something to you. So you're under things that you're doing, you're reviewing the current seller's property disclosure before your inspection. Here's the list for the stuff that the real estate broker is doing. Do you see on here that I am reviewing your seller's property disclosure? No, I am not reviewing your seller's property disclosure. You are reviewing that, okay? Reviewing past seller's property disclosures from previous listings if we have them. So if I have ones from grandma or the time before grandma, I'm trying to get that to you so you have it, okay? You're referencing the seller's property disclosure when you get your insurance on the property. So when you're calling your insurance guy, you're saying, okay, you know, this is what the seller told me about the property, is what I know. You're using that when you talk to your insurance guy to get your insurance quote. And if you require specific due diligence documents after reading it, you're like, hey, I want to know more about this. Can we request receipts for this? Okay, let's go ahead and request them. You'd be requesting those via an amend extend, and I'd be preparing that for you. If you're terminating based on what you find out in the SPD, then you're signing a notice to terminate and earnest money release prior to the inspection objection deadline. Can you decide, I don't know, 30 days after you go under contract, just arbitrarily, well past your inspection objection deadline, that you're terminating based on SPD? Nope. Has to be done based on another deadline. And so the deadline that's appropriate for this is the inspection objection, because that's your opportunity to inspect the property and object to the condition of the property. So really, it's the inspection objection deadline that is your deadline for being able to object based on SPD. Okay. Terminating based on SPD. I guess I jumped ahead. So you want to terminate and probably ask for your earnest money back if your contract is written such that you could get it back. And some of them are written not, right? You've waived your right to an inspection, and you get the copy of the SPD, and there's something on there you don't like. That's a bummer. That is a real bummer. You're probably losing your earnest money, okay? So you must do it prior to the inspection objection deadline, not the inspection resolution deadline. The inspection resolution deadline, if you remember correctly, or you probably haven't gotten to class yet, but it's next week, it's the one on inspections. The inspection resolution deadline is the deadline that once you object, for you and the seller to come together on terms as to what you agree is the solution for what you have objected to. That's the inspection resolution. You have to actually object before that. And then if we're terminating, we would complete the notice to terminate, which is a form that says you're terminating the agreement. We check off which section you're terminating based on. And then the earnest money release, which allows you, the seller, to say, I am agreeing with you that you're getting your earnest money back. If they don't sign it, that's a dispute, okay? So here's a copy of the notice to terminate. It allows you to check off a number of options for terminating if the way your contract was written allows it. So you can't just terminate based on any of these fields. Your contract needs to be written such that you have the right to object and terminate based on those things. And if you don't, it doesn't matter. I mean, you can send over a notice to terminate, and they're just like, no, you don't have that right. You've given up that right already. So you got to make sure your contract is written correctly. So here's what it says. Buyer's notification of unsatisfactory condition. Buyer notifies seller that the contract is terminated according to section 25 of the contract because the following are unsatisfactory to buyer. For terminating based on SPD, we would typically check off property or inclusions inspection, which is section 10.3. Section 25 explains what happens upon termination, and there's a spot for a signature and the date of the terminating party. So that's what it looks like. The earnest money release, here's a copy of that form. Looks for agreement from buyer and seller on who and what amount to release earnest money. So seller does not have to agree. They could say, I am disputing that you get your earnest money back. I disagree. You do not get your earnest money back. And now all of a sudden, you've got a dispute. And we got to go look into the contract to find out what's going on there. So if seller or buyer refuses to sign, there would be an earnest money dispute. And you should seek an attorney for advice. This is not something I can step in and resolve for you. It's not my role as broker in order to mediate or arbitrate or hear out cases where people disagree over earnest money. I could totally agree that you're right. I could agree that you're wrong. Either way, I'm not allowed to step in there and do that for you, okay? You need to go talk to an attorney at that point if you've got an earnest money dispute where the seller's not doing it. And some sellers, they're just pissed off because you terminated. And they may decide to drag their feet and not sign it and say, take me to court. You know, I don't care. I mean, fight me over it. And even if I lose, I'll give it back to you then. I just want to piss you off right now because you really screwed me because we were under contract and I was relying on this to close to buy my next house. And now I'm not going to be able to buy my next house because you went under contract and you terminated 10 days in. And I don't think you were playing fair. You were asking for unreasonable things. So I'm just not going to sign the agreement. You maybe do your earnest money back, but go ahead and fight me for it. I'm really pissed off right now. And they may just drag their feet until you decide to get an attorney and go after them in court, and you may totally win it and get it back, but they've just delayed it. Okay, so just be prepared for that. Okay, you can see closing instructions for how that might work, but you know, don't just automatically assume it's automatic. You get your earnest money back. No. Most of the time, you know, if you played fair and you kind of talk to a seller, you're really objecting based on a legitimate thing and it's in the contract that you have the right to object on that, I think a lot of sellers would be really reasonable about it. But doesn't take but one in order for you to be involved in a situation where the seller feels wronged and now you're fighting over it. Okay? So what are the pros and cons for a seller providing the seller's property disclosure before the showings? So here's some pros for the seller. Potential buyers have full disclosure ahead of time and are less likely to back out due to an issue on the seller's property disclosure later. So that's a pro for the seller, for giving it to you before you go on a showing, okay? It's a more streamlined process up front with potential for offers to come in with all disclosures already signed. So that's a benefit for the seller. Another benefit, it creates an open and honest dynamic from the outset of the deal that seller is disclosing everything to you up front. It's less likely for a buyer to think you're hiding stuff if you show them up front. Here's everything I know about the property, warts and all, okay? If you see something later and you're like, I think the seller may be trying to pull a fast one on me. He didn't tell me about that. It's not in the seller's property disclosure and he gave it to me after the fact. It just seems kind of fishy. So realize that's a benefit to give it to him early. What are the downsides for the seller? Well, it may reduce the number of showings if there are significant issues. If you've got a property with a lot of problems, telling people about those problems ahead of time, you know, might reduce the number of people that are willing to even go see it. You know, if people knew everything about me, let's say I was in a dating world. If I was like trying to get a date and I say, listen, before we go out on our first date, I want to tell you a couple things. Number one is I snore. Number two is I don't eat at home. I eat out for every single meal. You know, number three is I watch a lot of TV, really trashy TV, like, you know, The Bachelor and, you know, all these really stupid TV shows. And, no, I want to do this thing called Nomad where we want to move every year. So as long as you know about all those things, you know, I just want you to know that before we go on our first date, that's okay. Now, the people that decide to go out on a date with you, are they higher quality, higher qualified people? Sure. It's the same thing with the property. If you're telling them, here are all the things wrong with my property, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, if you still want to go, then please go out and see the property. The other way is you don't tell them about it, and then once they get in there and they're like, I really like this property, you say, okay, now that you like it, now let me tell you, I snore, I eat out every meal, you know, I've got diabetes, whatever, you know, whatever the thing is, right? So the idea is that if you disclose ahead of time, you might scare off some people. Buyers could be scared away by something that they may not be as concerned about once they see the property. To go back to the dating analogy, maybe I really don't snore that loudly or that much, or by the way, I sleep in a separate bedroom, so it's not that big of a deal, or you're deaf, it doesn't really matter, but you could be scared away. If you find out later that it wasn't as bad as you thought, you could lose potential buyers. So using a house analogy, you know, let's say you're disclosing that, you know, the property had some, you know, hail damage, and, you know, it really wasn't that bad, but you kind of make it out to be a big deal. And then they got there and they're like, that's fine, I have no problem with hail damage, but you made it be such a big deal ahead of time, you might have scared some people away. If it's out of date at the time you offer, you need to do a new one or update the old one. That's a downside of providing it early. Seller's business, and not everybody needs to know unless they're serious about making offers. So the downside is sellers sometimes don't want their nosy neighbors to know that they had a mold issue, or they had a flood, or they had something going on with their house, or you know, that they've got this really high-end hot water heater in their house and they don't want their neighbors to know that they got one. All sorts of weird things. Okay, and maybe they don't want people on subsequent transactions to be able to look back and see that either. So some sellers are super sensitive about that. All right, so normally during the live class, I would give out handouts of all the seller's property disclosures, and we would just go through them to kind of give you a feel of what's normal on those. I'm not doing that online, so good news is Q&A. Any questions about tonight's class, seller's property disclosures, anything like that? For the few people that joined us, because I didn't email anybody, and I'm really just recording these so that people have access to them. How was the class? Worth spending some time listening to? Entertaining, at least? So Elijah says yes. I think Teddy might be sleeping. All right, so that's it then, guys. Unless you have any questions, I am going to, yeah, Elijah says, you did a great job, covered a lot of information in a short time. Thanks, appreciate that. It's kind of like this very narrow field of topics, but I think it's an important document to understand and how it fits into the whole transaction and some of the kind of important information on the property. So you're very, very welcome. Oh, Teddy says no questions. Okay, good. All right, cool. Well, that's it, guys. I don't have anything else for you, so thank you so much for joining us. I will try to get the recording up either later tonight or tomorrow for those that didn't join us live, which Teddy says good class. So, yeah, you're welcome. I will see some of you guys tomorrow at the live class, but otherwise have a great night, and I will talk to you soon. Bye for now.